cities are vibrant multicultural melting pots woven from centuries of history and bustling commerce. But this dynamic growth comes with challenges. For instance, the world's fastest sinking city, Jakarta, is in Asia, prompting the Indonesian government to build a new administrative capital in the biodiversity rich island of Borneo. Many of the region's largest urban centers are also grappling with worsening air pollution, rising emissions, and increasingly erratic weather patterns. As urban planners and policymakers face these evolving challenges, cities across Asia are turning to smart and sustainable solutions. But the path forward isn't without hurdles, especially when it comes to bridging the digital divide, managing limited resources and environmental harms, and addressing critical data gaps. What role can data and AI play in shaping the smart cities of Asia? What are some of the most promising technological interventions already making an impact? And perhaps most importantly, can a technocentric city truly be an equitable one? In today's episode of Code Green, we are joined by ChengHe Guan and Raj Cherubal for a deep dive into the possibilities and pitfalls of data driven urban futures in Asia. Hello and welcome to Code Green, a podcast series where we explore the intersection of climate change and artificial intelligence in Asia. I am Donna Matthew, Senior Research Associate at Digital Futures Lab. We are an India based research organization that examines the impact of technology on society in the global south. Through evidence based research, systematic foresight, and public engagement, we work to realize equitable, safe, and sustainable digital futures for all. This podcast is accompanied by a monthly newsletter where we showcase the latest scientific and socio-technical research at the intersection of AI and climate action. You can access both the podcast and our newsletter at codegreen.asia. Code Green is supported by Earth Venture Foundation, a not for profit initiative that supports scientific research to advance climate action. In this episode of Code Green, we bring you diverse insights on the digital transformation of urban spaces, with a focus on smart and sustainable city initiatives in two of Asia's most populous countries, China and India. Stepping beyond important concerns of privacy and surveillance in data driven cities, we examine the enablers and disruptors in the quest for techno urban futures. Joining us is ChengHe Guan, Assistant Professor at NYU Shanghai and founding co-director of the Shanghai Key Laboratory of Urban Design and Urban Science. He takes us through the trajectory of big data in urban science and planning, emphasizing innovations that have enhanced how we gather, interpret, and apply information drawn from people's interaction with their surroundings. He shares his research on urban sensing techniques used to track mobility patterns and the use of public infrastructure, showcasing how fine grained data analysis can help shape more responsive and inclusive cityscapes. We also hear from Raj Cherubal, former CEO of Smart City Chennai Limited, who has dedicated years to improving urban governance and the everyday lives of residents in Chennai, one of the earliest adopters of the Smart City mission in India. Drawing from his on the ground experience, he reflects on the layered complexities of city systems and their intersections with climate resilience. He highlights how digital tools, including AI, could help bridge gaps in institutional capacity and urban planning. Yet, as both guests remind us, while data and AI are potentially valuable tools, they must be guided by thoughtful policy and inclusive design. Together, they call for considering societal behavior in planning, stronger global partnerships, and cross disciplinary knowledge sharing to avoid redundant efforts and co create cities that are equitable, safe, and accessible for all. Thank you, Chenga and Raj, for joining us today. Raj, maybe I can start with you. The concept of smart cities is quite deeply linked with AI for cities as well. Even as we are doing our research, we see the word smart cities coming up quite often. As someone who has been at the forefront of the smart city initiative in the Indian city of Chennai, what have been your learnings? If you could tell us a little more about India's experience with smart cities, how India has approached it, especially in the context of Chennai.
First of all, thank you for inviting me for this podcast. So it's wonderful. It's very simple. I think people get confused with the word smart. Some people I used to accuse it of being a computer manufacturer scam. Some people who are technophiles assume. I always joke that flying bullock carts tracked by GPS and satellite and everything is going to be technology. But in reality, smartness simply means sustainable. Whenever you go to an advanced city like a Shanghai, like a Tokyo, like a New York or a Paris, you walk on the street without getting run over by somebody. You breathe fairly cleaner air. You drink water from your hotel room tap without thinking twice. Children can run around and play. You can sit on the side of the road and drink wine or coffee or whatever. Most citizens are not worrying about AI, data, IoT device, nothing. Yeah, you want to enjoy life, or your there are many poor in any city. You want those children to be having an equal playing field as my child or your child, because otherwise they'll never be able to catch up. You don't want poor to have like a layered healthcare where whether it's COVID or whether it is a simple disease, you don't want them to be dying on the side of the road or going bankrupt just because they didn't have the money to cure themselves and so on. Public health, even if you don't care about the poor, public health is public health. It affects everybody. So in every aspect, you just it's all about quality of life. That's all it is. Whatever advanced city has, you want it. And the credit to Smart City Mission, if you read the guideline, it doesn't talk about technology, it doesn't talk about AI, helicopters, or satellite, nothing. It just says, hey, more greenery, more this, more that, and make sure that your climate change adapting, you're resilient because of the floods and the droughts and whatnot. So think of it as simply a beautiful, sustainable, peaceful also, because security, communal riots, theft, safety, crime against various communities or gender, etc. These are all every city's problems. And how do you smartly, by protecting people's rights, make sure that everybody's safe and so on and so forth. So that's what to me is smartness, and it's very difficult to define it in any other way for me. The problem in Indian context is that, and anybody who has been to an Indian city, you'll realize that for various historical reasons, we are hundreds of years behind other cities. We are in a big mess, actually speaking, and I'm putting it very mildly. It's like the cities have zero capacity to do even the most basic things, and we can have an entire different seminar on why Paris is Paris versus, let's say, a Chennai or a Mumbai is in a big mess, right? And even the most patriotic Indian will say, yes, our cities are a big mess. So 15 years ago, if you want to figure out how do you improve a bus system, what do? You hire a bunch of human beings. He or she will stand on the side of the road, count the number of buses, how many people went into the bus, etc. Or if you want to make a sidewalk to make people safe, you'll stand and count. If you want to regulate traffic properly, you'll stand on the side and road and count, right? By the time this man or woman counts the cars and counts the pedestrian, the time has gone by, priorities have changed, governments have changed, elections have come and gone, and then nobody knows where that data is, right? A few years ago, it started changing from paper, it became Excel, then it became some software. And today we take it for granted that there are a lot of intelligent cameras out there, IoT devices, and so on and so forth. And we even take it for granted that there are cell phones that can give you more data than you could ever imagine. You can exactly say, how do young women travel? How do older women travel? How do poor women travel? How do working lower middle class men travel, etc., etc., right? And if you want to really customize your transport, you can do that. So another example I'll give you is in government schools, there are 40, 50 children, right? Even my own children's school in some fancy school is difficult to get good teachers, have focused education. So maybe let's assume I am slow. I can only do 1 plus 1 right now. Maybe you can do 10 plus 10 already. In a typical class, I get left behind. So the question was, how do you customize education for the poor children? Similarly, in terms of health, this is any topic, right? Where do you plant a tree? What kind of tree should be planted? All this because 100, 200, 300 years in Paris or London or New York or Shanghai for that matter, or Tokyo for that matter, you have systems in place. You started with paper and pencil, but over the years you had the capacity to build. So the things which a Shanghai or a London takes it for granted, it's like a big deal for us. We're just not able to do it, right? Simple things we're not able to do it. Which pothole should you fix? Which pothole is causing the most accident in the city? So the way I look at it, you want to attack the 80-20 problem. Which 20% of the pothole is causing 80% of the accident, or things like that. I mean, any topic you can discuss that, because we have very limited resource, limited time. I mean, we don't have 100 years to sit back and say, okay, you know what, we will go the traditional route. So I think keeping the quality of life in mind, the idea was to use data, and now of course AI, which means you're using some super intelligence to do things and catch up with the rest of the world, so that with limited resource, how do we put that resource into the best use possible, so that we can keep leapfrogging rather than going the traditional route that other cities have taken and we don't have the time and money for it, or the expertise. Can we now leapfrog and catch up? How do we have very limited capacity? How do we use data, etc., to tell us, okay, very limited money, where should I put? Which footpath, which sidewalk should I fix? Which route of the bus should I put more buses into? These are all like pulling teeth in India. Believe me, it's absolutely painfully difficult in India because of the data issue and so on and so forth. Data has started helping us a lot. Now with AI, not just data, but I am assuming that it'll help us start planning better. The way data leapfrogs into an advanced system and says, look, don't worry about everything, just fix these three roads, right? Or fix these three things. Now, analysis and AI should be able to tell us multi-department issues, multi-topic issues, a tree, a stormwater drain, a bus route, a lamp post, all this are connected in a city, right? These are just layers of a city. And human brain can't handle these layers. We can hardly deal with one layer at a time. How do we use AI and whatnot to help us plan the way advanced cities would, which we don't have the capacity for?
Thank you. Thank you so much for breaking that down and like highlighting that important point around why data and AI kind of creep in, especially when you're talking about limited resources and dependencies on those. So that makes a lot of sense. And thank you also for like bringing out that point around like how the cities like these different layers where you have different points of intervention. You also mentioned how AI could potentially help in some of these places, making sense of that data and making sense of like big data in this space, and also how like smart cities in some senses the point of intervention is the quality of life actually. Do you also see smart cities and like these missions in general looking at climate issues or like mitigating climate issues, adapting to climate issues in India?
It has to, and the problem is that, this is, again, I say this as a joke. Imagine if I can't even understand how to fix my road. Now you're coming and telling me there's a concept of resilience, which I don't understand. Now you're saying there's something called climate, I don't understand. Now, even if I understand climate and carbon, what am I supposed to do with it? Right? I always joke that you're telling me that polar bear is dying, or some glacier is melting somewhere. What am I supposed to do? I don't even know how to fix my pothole properly, right? I'm trying to figure out how to dump a bunch of tar into the pothole, and it's a bumpy pothole. Now it's like a mountainous pothole, and you're coming and telling me climate change. What do you want me to do? I joke. I mean, I'm joking about it. But the seriousness of is that India is the largest country in the world, whether we like it or not, right? We are the most populous. Increasingly, India is going to be urbanized, urbanized, urbanized. So more people are going to come into the city. So it's a multi-dimensional opportunity or a disaster, right? So for example, if we don't quickly fix our education system, we're going to have millions of young people unemployable, unskilled, etc. And China, I'm sure, has a similar problem. Everybody has similar problem. If many more people are going to come into cities, and if we can't even take care of the few people that exist today, how are we going to look at a city that is 3, 4, 5, or 10 times megalopolis, right? We can hardly fix roads, I'm sorry, streets. How are we going to look at districts and regions and whatnot? Our brain can't even handle it, right? So, from a climate point of view, we owe it to ourselves and the world to say, look, okay, what does climate mean? Do I plant more trees? Do I fix a preventive mechanism of flooding and drought? Do I take proactive measure of reducing carbon? Now it's easy for some people will say hydrogen, some people will say magnesium, some people say some other based energy. What am I supposed to do with it? How is that related to agriculture policy? There are, on one hand, you may have hungry farmers on this side unable to sell their product because there's no value addition to their product, right? They hardly get making any money. On the other hand, if 100 kilometers away, there's a hydrogen plant that could reduce cost of energy, etc., dramatically, let's say. Now, who sits and plans agriculture and hydrogen at the same time, right? We can hardly plan hydrogen or agriculture separately. Now, who's going to put this together? Which means road networks, which means how many ports the state or a city or a country needs. How is that connected to our airports? Which is the shortest route for the farmer to take his or her product into a cold storage so that it can be shipped off to the best possible market and so on. I mean, we are talking about a mind-bogglingly complex problem, which is multi-department, multi-sectoral, multi-whatever else, right? In a changing environment, it's not a static environment. For 30, 40 years, we have talked about solar, right? Everybody said solar is going to be the thing to do. And I challenge people to come to Chennai. I keep joking that we are a country drowning in solar energy. I mean, we're literally drowning. I mean, it's so hot. But you will not see a single solar panel on anybody's roof. Are we all fools to not put solar panel because it's such a wonderful technology? Obviously, there's some problem, right? How come you don't have solar? How come I don't have solar on my rooftop if it is such a wonderful thing? So by the time we figure out what is solar, somebody is saying hydrogen. By the time we say what figure out what is hydrogen, somebody will say magnesium. So it's like jumping into a rapids and we are trying to swim and trying to go up. Like salmon, we are trying to go uphill. It's an impossible. I mean, it looks like an impossible task, and I'm purposely exaggerating to dramatize the the problems we are facing. So I think business as usual cannot deal with what we are dealing with, right? And if we don't fix these problems, I think we are staring at something very bad, not only in cities but also around the world. Because what India does can affect the world. But at the same time, I'm very proud that Chennai used to be the largest smart city project in the country, only because Mumbai was not part of it, Calcutta was not part of it, not for any other reason. We're the fourth largest city. Optimistically, what I thought was whatever good we do in Chennai, and let's assume magically we figure out some good stuff here, we can actually export this to the world because Chennai is one of the largest smart city. Tamil Nadu is one of the largest countries, states in India, and one of the most populous and probably the most urbanized. And as the world, Africa, etc., urbanizes, we could actually set examples, and whether it's climate, whether it's resilience, whether it's use of technology, we could actually experiment things and put things into practice here and have a scale and not simply a prototype or some kind of a piloting. We can have scale in these kinds of places, which could be used in rest of the world, and that could fight climate change and make life better for millions more than Chennai alone.
Great. That's a useful reality check also in highlighting like just the complexity of the problem that cities face. On that note, Chenghe, I'll turn to you and your work at the Shanghai lab, how you're leading some innovative tech interventions in urban green space planning. So if you could tell us a little about the problem statement that you're solving and perhaps also speak to the context that Raj was talking about, if you see some similarities in how this smart cities, the sustainable cities framework has evolved in India with the work that you're doing.
So, like Raj mentioned, there's a lot of issues with cities in India. We do have a lot of issues here in Chinese city as well. How we unfold, how we break down, the layer of the issues, and then how we can, as a urban scholar, we can provide better solutions or provide policy recommendations is what very important. Donna, as you mentioned, our lab do a lot of urban green space studies. This is one of the scenarios. It can easily be put to other scenarios as well. So green space is just one, I would say, one test ground where we can utilize big data to study the spatial and temporal dimensions of urban function. To put this in the context, we talk about smart city, we talk about resilient city, we talk about sustainable city. I would say a lot of these theories can be related to the metabolism theory that was proposed in the 1970s, which is related to the establishment of the Earth Day, to understand how we as human beings we can better live together or coexist with the nature. So these kind of discussions, there's a lot of people, from Hikomaki, and then there are people from UPenn, in Macquarie. They are all focusing on this. Between then, now and then, it has been 50, 60 years. The difference is the flow of information, data from the conventional data to big data, not only because the amount of data, but also the way how we capture and utilize the data. That actually make our city much more complicated. Back then, no infrastructure to capture the data doesn't mean those kind of information doesn't exist. Today, we are not only able to capture those data, but we were able to utilize the data to review the unseenable dimensions of cities, of activities, of how people use parks. So these are the things I think is the bigger context that we can start to discuss smart city data applications and AIs. I would just say, for example, today how we capture data in cities, we use urban sensing technique, including smartphone, right? We all have smartphones, and then this actually can track our locations. One of the technique we are using is from NT Docomo. It's a Japanese cell phone carrier. So they actually track people's activities every 5 minutes, and then these are the data set. Of course, we remove all the private informations. We can understand from January 1st of the year to December 31st what are the visitation patterns of certain green space in a city, or the green networks, how people are utilizing those space. This urban sensing technique reveals us the patterns that exist for human behavior that affected by the built environment. And then the AI technique provide the methodology that we can analyze the data, both spatial and temporal. The AI technique can also help us to establish a systematic understanding of the connections or informations or structures of those data. And we can use those data not only to understand the existing patterns, we can also use that to predict the future patterns. In predicting the future patterns, we can make policy inference. We can make policy implications. So just one example about the urban green space, we're using mobile phone data to understand human patterns. So we are trying to understand, there's one, I would say, challenge that peri-urban parks in Shanghai after COVID-19 during the weekend has been flushed with people. During the weekday, it's just green space. There's a lot of open parking spots, but during the weekend, you can't find a single parking spot. And then almost everyone was like out in the open space in the park. And then this becomes one of the challenge that urban planners or policymakers want to try to solve. So we are using mobile phone data in Shanghai to understand the peri-urban park usages of these visitors, and we try to understand how this pattern can be better channeled into the existing resources, the scarce resources of urban green space in Shanghai. There are other urban sensing techniques which we are trying to focus not only activity but also how our vision, how we understand the street view images, how we look at the city, how that information affect we understand the city, affect our experience as human beings. Those also relies very much on the AI technique, neuroscience, and then other models to review the information behind the data. And then there's also sound, not only human being, birds, and then other creatures also, they are affected by those soundscapes. That's also another set of AI technique that can support that. When we touch a material, the sense through this kind of contact with human beings, and then there's other senses. The smell of the city, right? There's a lot of street vendors. That kind of smell is very different from, there's a clean street, nothing else, versus you're in a park, you can smell the trees, and then you're on the street, you smell probably the cars. So these are kind of a bigger context where we can put into a new paradigm where we can use data and AI technique to understand our cities.
Amazing. That sounds very fascinating, especially on the data around like using sensorial experiences. But just to follow up on that, what kind of data would you be using, especially on examples, say around like visual data or your sense of touch, etc., to use that in machine learning technologies? What kind of data would be used, and what are the sources for that data?
That's a great question. So the data source decided what kind of AI technique can be invented to support us, right? So we basically divided three type of data. So the first type is very much derived from the conventional understanding of a city boundary, right? So a city of Chennai, right? A city of Goa, a city of Shanghai. So all the activities that happens within the city doesn't matter if it's human being, it's cars, it's the emission of carbons. All this data happens within the physical boundary, the spatial boundary. So that's one way that we can categorize those data belongs to that space. It's associated with that space. That's the first type. And then the second type of data are actually, we call those in-between data. So if, say, I travel to Chennai to meet with Raj, and then the activities of me leaving Shanghai, taking the flight, or maybe I'll stop at some places in the layover before I reach Chennai. That's kind of information will be beyond the city boundary. So those kind of informations, it's really hard to put into either of the cities, right? Then we need a more network type of understanding. Maybe we can use temporal dimensions to measure that, right? So that data doesn't belong to a single space, but it actually happens within a certain time period. So we need to create that kind of label or dimension to connect that data or information happens in between. And then the third type are more specific. So we actually work with a lot of third type of data. The third type is related to the certain sector of the industry. For example, transportation, mobility. And then within transportation mobility, there are subsectors, right? So there's heavy trucks. We work with a lot of heavy trucks, not only using urban sensing technique, but also using satellite that kind of orbiting between the pole, the South Pole and Northern Pole, that to capture that kind of heavy truck fleet movement. And then, for example, human mobility, we can use cell phone data. And then these are the sectorial data related to certain industry or sub-industry. So this can be very specific. Green space, for example, can be one of the subcategories of how everything happens in that green space. Access to that green space can be categorized in that kind of category.
Thanks so much for that, Chenga. And perhaps on that note, I'll also ask a follow up question on data sharing and access. We're seeing a lot of open access data portals emerging in the region, and you've also done some work on this topic. What have been your learnings about accessing and reusing urban data from different sources?
So this is actually a really big question. I think we should have a symposium to talk about the data sources. Uh, I would just say, in a nutshell, we have tried different ways to acquire data. Different ways to share the data, but it's not a very easy way to go. I think the barrier of getting the data, of sharing the data, is even more difficult than getting a visa to go to different countries. So we are trying to be creative, so to provide incentive for data owners to share their data. That means we are trying to create platforms where people can treat their data, so people can use their data as their on top of their physical asset, as a way to go to the bank to get loans, right, to get mortgage, right. So they have financial incentive to share the data, but that's also not very successful. We have been trying that for 5 6 years. We were part of this kind of big project where almost every province in China we have established a big data center. We have established data transaction center, but still most of data transactions are not in the platform, because the issue of the ownership, because the issue of who can sell and resell the data, right? So if I sell my house to you, you have my house, but if I sell the data set to you, I still have the data set. So these are and also how bank recognize this digital asset to give loans. This year, maybe I have a lot of really good data, right? And then I go to the bank, say this is the leverage, right? So I'm going to use this to get, say, $1 million, and so I can acquire additional data. But next year, this data set, the value of it diminish, right? It might diminish to 500,000. Then the bank they will come to me, say, then you need to fix this, because it's almost like your house now worth less, 50% less. Now you don't have enough money to cover it, right? So you have to put more money. So these are the I would say detailed issues that prevent us from having more data sharing, data collaborations. But this is not something that as scholars we can solve. We definitely need to work with the banks, with policymakers. In the long run, I think that's still the way to go. But in short term, as urban scholars, we'll collaborate with as many institutions as possible. Once we have both have incentive to work together. We have academic values. Some people have social values. Some people can get their, say, market values, the financial, incentives, and then we can collaborate.
Thanks so much for that. I mean, I feel that also financial data is not something that we think of immediately when we're thinking of smart cities, etc. That's also a useful point to make. Raj, perhaps I'll turn to you here. And while talking about kind of like the enablers that cities need for be it smart cities, for resilient cities, one thing that we've coming across is that there's a lot of retrofitting of technologies that happens when we talk about smart cities. So, what are the kind of infrastructures or the kind of scaffolding that smart cities need, especially like for a data-driven future?
See, I think depending on the city, I mean, one good thing that a lot of smart cities have tried is something called the command and control center, right? 7 year, 8 years ago, it was all mystery to everybody because the idea of a camera with intelligence in it was like a fantasy. I mean, people used to laugh at me when I heard it. Some Brazilian guy talk about it. Then I went and told somebody, and they started laughing, saying, "There's no such thing, right?" Today, I don't think there are too many doubters about all this. Nobody even knew what an IoT device was and what. So I think that technology, all this has become cheaper. Now the problem is every department needs an ERP system, a customer relationship system, a volunteer management system, or a flood prediction system, and data coming about the previous floods and the rains to be fed into the system to see where will it flood. Which means you want to know the contours of the city, which parts of the city will get flooded first, and 20 years ago where it got flooded versus what is going to happen tomorrow, because the city has changed. We put roads in the wrong place or walls in the wrong place, so the water used to go west, now it's going east. It gets complicated. So the problem becomes no city seem to have a concept of a chief technology officer and team, right? And I'm over technocratizing it, but in a company you would have these things. If you have in a big company, you have same problem, right? You have HR people need a software. You need factory workers need a better software to make their life easy, and so on and so forth, right? You need to see, are you spending too much electricity, and so on and so forth. A city is no different. So a bus system, like what ChengHe said, there's so much data coming from so many places. You already have all that data in many cases. All the buses have GPS. Everybody's carrying a phone around. But which is the team in the city sitting and saying, okay, you know what? These are the layers of software that we need so that I can make sense of the data coming. And then we can talk to a ChengHe or another scientist and another technocrat and say, okay, look, these are the data I have. What am I supposed to do? These are my problems. I want to find out where are the cholera cases coming from, or where are the children who are malnourished. How do I find out which area children are not getting nutrition properly, and so on and so forth, right? Where are the teachers not attending schools properly, even though they're getting a salary? It's impossible task on the surface of it. So the technology exists. It's like fixing the road only. It's how do you bring these things together as a city and not make it so overcomplicated that you're not able to, like, even companies get into this trouble, right? They bite more than they can chew, and then the whole thing falls apart. So I think we can do this in pieces if necessary, phases if necessary, and that's what many cities are attempting. So what ChengHe said is something exactly what people like me used to dream about. Like, just with the data, tell us what's going on in the city, right? Parks. Someday it's empty, someday it's full. Where are women feeling unsafe? So instead of doing a 2 year survey of all the women in the city, can we figure this out and fix the problem before people realize there's a problem? And so on and so forth. Where are people urinating on the road because there's no toilet available? Or where there are toilets but nobody's going inside, urinating on the side of the road? These are a standard rat problem, stray dog problem, stray cow problem. These are all standard problems every city has. The problem becomes a lack of a technology core of the city from a city point of view, right? On a positive note, a lot of bits and pieces are happening. So, for example, Chennai has a very good social media team. So, communicating with the public through Twitter, Facebook, etc., they do a very good job. They get feedback, complaints come through social media and through phone calls, and there's a way to quickly fix the problem and react to them. Now, the question is, can we now proactively fix the problem so that people don't have to waste their time complaining about it, right? And that requires the next level of technology, next level of core team to sit and talk to professors on one hand, talk to technology people on the other hand, understand enough to see which technology works. The problem city faces is that everybody's trying to sell you something, right? From IoT device maker to software guy. And if you're not adapted technology, you get confused and you end up buying these disparate systems that don't talk to each other. Then somebody will come and say, sir, that API doesn't talk to this API, or this data format doesn't fit with that data format, so it's all a waste of time. I mean, it's very frustrating actually if you think about it. There are drone surveys of the city, and then they'll say that drone survey millimeter is different from the drone millimeter we expected, so we can't use it because we had to do it all over again. So unless there is a city think tank that sits and says, okay, I'm going to run this purely from a technology, people, public, democracy, all that point of view, and let me deploy technologies, etc. So, for example, there used to be 6 years ago, there used to be a debate about physical server versus cloud, because nobody had any idea what cloud is, and then people are worried where this cloud is situated. So now, of course, those problems are not a big problem. Everybody knows what a cloud, or at least the consultants know what a cloud is. but I see at least five people chasing flooding related studies. One guy is talking about IoT device on this side, another guy is doing a survey on that side. I literally, I'm not joking. Right now in Chennai, there are probably five people studying floods in five different areas without talking to each other, right? And even if they finish their study, what are they going to do with it? God alone knows. And will that make a difference? Yes, it will make a difference. But could it have been better? I don't know. So I think what ChengHe and all mentioned, data coming in a much more transparent way, and I've seen this in demonstration. I've seen a phone data analysis of how people move in the city. Could be gold mine for a bus company. Let me make another case. Okay, more than a tech. Computers are easy to buy. Technology is easy to buy. Problem is persuasion. Right? Simple. Take a simple example of traffic. If logic alone were the tools of persuasion, no city on earth will have a car, right? Everybody will be going in buses and trains and Ola, Uber. That's it. I mean, but human beings don't think like that. I think, okay, it's hot. I need to get to the bus stop. I don't want to walk to the bus stop in the sun. It's too hot and humid. And I'll take my car. I would rather get stuck in traffic, sitting in an AC, listening to music, than get stuck in that horrible looking bus with crowded bus, right? That's how human beings think. So no amount of data is going to help us change that. But if AI could be linked to, for example, behavioral economics, to not only planners are told, look, this is the reality and not what you think is the reality. Because many planners think like individuals, at least in India, I don't know about abroad. I go in a car, I'm stuck in traffic, so which means this road needs to be widened. It's amazing how people think, right? I don't want people running across the road because I need to be going fast. They don't understand that the road should not have existed in the middle of the city. People should not be going at high speed like in a highway in the middle of the city. That old lady running across the road doesn't have a place to cross the road. She has to walk 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers simply to cross the road. We don't think along those lines unless you're specializing in a particular topic. Is right. It's otherwise me, my car, my AC, or my this. This is of all human beings think. That doesn't make me bad. I'm just a human. Now, how do I use data to persuade people to say, you know what, little 80-20 again. You take 20% of the cars out of the road, 80% of your traffic disappears. So, where is the traffic problem? All these problems are 80-20 problems. The problem is persuasion. So I think AI could help us do the behavioral economics thing that we have talked about for the last 20 years. Everybody loves behavioral economics, but nobody can figure out what it is. Do we put a yellow line and make people pee over here? Do we put a yellow line and throw garbage there? The point is, AI needs to now help us figure out how to persuade policymakers and the average people to do what is right. I wish AI would help us persuade policymakers who are very resistant to new ideas and new way of thinking, especially in India, because of again lack of understanding and data and public. I mean, what all bureaucrats and politicians say, look, I understand what you mean, but how can I sell this to the public who wants to sit in their car or whatever else, whatever the thing is? How do we persuade the public? And this is, I mean, and like I was joking that everybody talks about behavioral economics for the last 20 years, but nobody seemed to, I'm not able to figure out what it is. Everybody talks about putting a yellow line and making people do something here, a blue line there, and everybody will do something that, and typical examples we give. But in a city level, what is behavioral economics? How do we use data to persuade? I've heard one example, for example, the electricity, where if you tell me Mother Earth and glacier and Antarctica, I won't listen to you. I'll continue using my electricity the way it is. The moment you show me data saying that all my neighbors are using 100 units of electricity, but I am using 200, immediately I jump up and say, okay, where am I losing money, right? So we may have to customize a lot of this data to make people change their behavior, especially in the context of climate change and whatnot. This is where I think AI and data will be even more powerful than simply saying, okay, we'll catch up with the rest of the world. We need huge changes in the way people live on the planet. And humanly, right now, I don't think we have enough power and capacity to do that talking, other than in theoretical terms. I think we need to connect AI with behavioral economics and whatnot to be able to actually take the city towards a better, sustainable modes.
No, that's a very interesting point, and I also recall like just going off on what you said on nudging consumers and like electricity usage. So last time when we were doing the Rockefeller research, there was also some use case that we saw in Singapore, where it's already being done, where you get some kind of idea of how your neighbors are using electricity, and they just nudges behavior towards more climate positive behavior. So that's an interesting example. And Chenghe, I'll turn to you here, going off on what Raj was saying around like the technology core that the city needs, and also like acting proactively towards like the city's issues, identifying issues beforehand instead of reacting to complaints from citizens. I know you've done some work on digital twins and simulations and urban planning. How does that fit into this conversation? Like, what are the methodologies that you work with? What are the approaches you're seeing? And perhaps there are some examples from the region that you can talk about.
Okay, so I'll answer the question by also reflect what Raj just mentioned. I think Raj mentioned very interesting stories of how people making decisions, driving cars and other decisions. In our field, we call this self-selection process. People make a lot of their own decisions from their perspective. I think not taking a societal or systematic understanding of how people have this kind of behavior is one thing that we miss very much from planning our cities. Is also one thing that we are missing to, I would say, combat with the equity issues in our city. So again, I will use green space as an example to explain this. In the past, if we say if we provide enough green space for everybody in the city, the equity issues, right? So we just draw a circle, right? So in this area, these people has access to one park within 15 minutes walking distance. So this is the decision we'll make. And then in the other place, this place, people will have to walk 30 minutes to access to a park. So then we will say this is equity issues because one area has better access to green space than the other area. But in reality, again connected to what Raj mentions, people's behavior. This is not the truth. When we using mobile phone data, we find out a lot of people they use their green space not just next to their home locations. They go to work. They travel during the weekend. So a lot of these accessibilities are based on multiple locations. And then we start to, building the urban digital twins to reflect this kind of individual behaviors by collecting this data and then put into the urban digital infrastructure to help to solve the physical infrastructure issues that we are facing right now. But then, with this mobile phone data, we are reviewing a new dimension. In the past, it's just the built environment providing spatial inequality. But now, when we consider the individual behavior, we consider the social economic conditions, we will find out maybe some of the spatial inequality doesn't exist. But at some other places, the seemingly equally distributed green space is actually creating a lot of inequitable conditions because people's behavior. And on top of that, what we are doing right now, we are trying to introduce a concept called the quantum computing or quantum urbanism. So we are using a new way to not only collect data, to analyze the data, to understand the data that shows human behavior, that will give us mechanisms to understand the reason behind. So not only we are looking at the two-dimensional world, we are actually incorporating the three-dimensional world. For example, if we have a lot of drones flying up in the air, how that will be connected with people on the floor level, right? So this is a way that we need to involve game theories. We need to involve a lot of quantum computing to understand how what happens up here affect people's behavior down there, right? So a lot of quantum theory just shows, when there are people watching, from a higher place, behavior down there will change. So how that will be reflected in our quantum computing, and then how that will be involved into the construction of urban digital twin, and then to create a more equitable and sustainable city.
Thanks, Chenga. This just also like it's making me think about it's great to have technologies that'll be able to identify these issues, have these interventions, but then you also need those supporting ecosystems like governance and finance to address and like sustain these interventions. So Rajparas, I'll come to you with that question around, and I'll combine two questions on governance and finance together. One is around A lot of this is dependent on state capacity to be able to implement technology solutions in a sustainable manner. So, are you seeing a lot of public private partnerships? How are they working in the Indian context? And the second related question to that is also that you need sustainable financing to make sure that these interventions stick in some sense and it's equitably distributed across groups in a city. So, are there any learnings you also have from your smart city work in Chennai or some recommendations there?
So I think world is very different from what it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Absolutely different, right? So the idea of bringing private sector consultants, etc., into the government and taking their help, it's no big deal anymore. So that is a good news because you can't have technology ingrown in the government, you can't have finance people ingrown in the government, and you don't sometimes need full-time people sitting there and doing this. Sometimes you need. Anyway, that's the good news. So bringing in outsiders is not the problem. What I suggest is that every city or what organization needs a core people who understand what's happening outside. So if ChengHe were to come and talk to us, we have to understand what he's saying, right? It can't be like listening to Greek or Latin and have no idea what you're talking about. It's pointless. But that doesn't mean I have to be an expert like him to understand every detail of what he's saying. So similarly, there will be hundreds of different technology experts, etc., that a city needs. But the city, and to devise the vision of the city, devise the strategy of the city, there should be some expertise inside the city, so that we can start laying the groundwork to absorb people from the outside. So that is the core of it. And then the other thing I always found, and this I always say, now people start quoting me, that is, the problem is not money. If you have detailed project report, and again I'm oversimplifying, if you have a detailed project report, money falls from the sky, in my opinion, right? The problem is detailed project report, because detailed project report takes n number of experts sitting over many years or days or whatever, hand holding, compromise, fights, persuasion, etc., to even plant a tree, right? Even planting a tree is a technology major problem. Plant it here or there type. Problem is not money. At the moment you have a nice project, politician, I've not met a politician who says I don't want to do good projects. Everybody wants to do good project. Public wants good project. So we should, by putting finance in front, we're putting the cart before the horse. And finally, what I would say is that Chennai, like many other cities, is one of the richest places in the world. It may not look like it. It's one of the richest places in the world. For us to say we don't have money is a crime against ourselves. The problem is how do we extract that money, right? So we are not saying we are a poor, drought-ridden village. This is one of the largest, most dynamic cities in the world. And if we don't have money, nobody has money. Problem is, again, the money is on this side, the detailed project report is somewhere else, a half-baked one is sitting somewhere else, public is somewhere else, the politician is somewhere else. A good city would have had all these put together and it would be seamless, taken for granted, it happens on a daily basis. Here, everything is chaotic and we're not able to bring it together. So I think, and also last bit is that these are all non-linear. I mean, he was talking about quantum mechanics. These are all non-linear coupled equations, right? It's not like technology happens independently and then governance happens somewhere and then something happens somewhere. A little bit of technology happens, governance changes, technology changes, public changes, opinion changes, etc. We don't know what will happen in the future, but they all are interconnected. So I think it has to all go in parallel forward, march forward, and rather than assume only one thing, okay, we cannot do anything until when governance changes. No, that's not how it works. We can't, all the technology has to be aligned in a row before we do anything. If we wait for that, we can't do a single thing. We'll have to move forward with what we have, and that itself will have positive and negative effects in the future. We'll have to deal with that, but we have to keep moving forward with what we have, with the best of intention, best of planning, best of thinking that is available at the given time.
Thank you for highlighting that non-linearity, and I guess that gives also lets us do that segue into the final section of the podcast on recommendations. So, just given how complex planning cities are, the issues around quality of life and climate issues also, what would be your recommendations for safe and equitable cities of the future, where perhaps technologies have a role, might not have a role? And Chenge, perhaps you can go first.
Okay. So if time allows, maybe I would like to have a longer conversation with Raj about the nonlinear relationship. This is a big thing we are working on every day on our research. Now back to Donna's question. I'll just say recommendations. First, we need to keep developing urban sensing technique. These are the things where we can actually have access to data, to record the data, to analyze the data, to create AI techniques to support the way how we understand. Second, I would say quantum computing. I think this is another kind of a paradigm shift where we can break down to the sense that beyond human senses. We can feel 1 second, right? But when we break down 1 second into a million divisions, we don't feel that. But that mechanism in the whole society, in the whole world, can make a lot of things that the nonlinear reasonings can create a lot of issues that we don't understand. And when we need that kind of information to analyze our city. Last, I would say, but most importantly, is that we should propose things that not just India or China or any other nations. We should have a global platform. We are actually working with UNITAR, United Nations Institute for Training and Education. We are proposing a set of building future sustainable city rules. It's called Urban Climate Community. So we have bring this to many platforms in the past already. Now we're hoping maybe in the future we can actually focusing on how UNITAR, by setting up a physical office in Shanghai, are pushing forward this kind of regulations where stakeholders can all share and contribute.
Thank you so much, ChengHe. Raj, same question for you.
So yeah, I think see the problem is universal and different ways, right? So Shanghai may have problems, but it'll be different, and Chennai may have different problem and so on. Africa and many cities and whatnot will have other problems. So I think like what Cheng He mentioned, I'll kind of join him and say that we need to be able to share some of this stuff because climate change, everything is a global problem, and most cities don't have the capacity to do even a piloting, right? So what if we were to have few cities in the world, different kinds of cities that pilots some of these issues, and not simply see piloting is difficult, but then scaling is a different problem. So imagine if Chennai or Mumbai or somebody were to have dedicated teams that bring in different parts of people from different parts of the world and technologies and whatnot, try out certain things and come up with low cost, open source, as much as possible, but at the same time paid. I mean, like I said, money is never an issue. I've never had a problem that saying, okay, money is the problem. So that dedicated team, etc., is very rare. And every city cannot afford to have those dedicated bunch of people because hardly there are few people out there to do these kinds of things. So I would argue that like Rockefeller has tried with 100RC resilience, C40 and ITDP, and a lot of other people are trying this to kind of come up with solutions that can be expandable to other cities. These things, we need such teams, and I assume your organization and all is attempting to do things like this, where you put things on the ground, pretend you are, for example, the CTO office of a city, and you ask yourself what are the different things a city needs to be doing, from basic things all the way to hi-fi, AI and whatnot. And then when it works, how do you export this to other cities who need it but don't have the capacity to think through all this problem, right? It's like selling a car, right? Cars were there only in a few cities once upon a time, but now they manufacture somewhere and export it everywhere, good or bad. Similarly, how do we take this solution to other places? Because like I said earlier, when we say AI and whatnot, we are assuming that it's one monolith thing sitting there. It's not. You have like n number of areas, technologies, and each technology will have n number of companies selling this product, trying to figure out what works with what and how it works and all. It's just near impossible for even one team to do anything. So that's what I would suggest, that setting up global think tanks that are dedicated to these things. Plus, also one tragedy is that I see there's a lot of replication that goes on. Similar NGOs or organizations, they're just doing the same thing that this person was doing. So, for whatever reason, there's very little cooperation. So, if you're producing a document, I would rather take that document and build on it rather than reinvent the wheel and spend money and time and effort. So, I think we need more global cooperation in these areas so that we can do that. The other thing is identifying problems. The other problem a lot of these technologies will have in many cities is that when you come to the city with certain solutions, you have no idea where to even start. Okay, where do you go for a permission? Where do I put my equipment? If you want to put sensors, you're supposed to get a bunch of permissions and whatnot. Who does that? What does that? So what we tried to do in Chennai was to say, can we create a sandbox where I'm not interested in commercial startups, that they can handle it themselves. But let's say urban social startups which need space, permission. Some people will come and say, look, I got this fancy technology which will take sewage water and make it into amazing water, and so on. I need a place. Well, we could help you get permission to put it somewhere near the dirty water place and clean it up so that the water body can be clean, and so on and so forth, right? So I think we could create a bunch of sandboxes in India, and maybe around the world, but especially in India, where the whether it's the governance or the NGOs can be more active and cooperative and help create an innovative environment for these kinds of things with mission driven. It can't, we are not a academic institution to do research. I mean, we are not interested in research. We should be able to say these are the problems, can be in different ways, competitive way, whatever way maybe, find solution for those things, assemble them, and say, okay, this is the solution, and ask Lagos or Nairobi or Paris for that matter, you have technology. For example, there's a ship called Plastic Odyssey. They go around the world helping solve the plastic problem, right? Bunch of young people from France, from what I understand, they collect technologies and startups. So they are trying to solve one problem of plastic, and there are many different solutions to many different problems in plastic. Similarly, we could do things for AI and data. And then, like I said earlier, there are people working on behavioral economics. They are also struggling to figure out, where do I start? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? So if we could help merge these things and saying, okay, a garbage problem, littering problem, traffic problem, child safety, education. I mean, children learning fast and nice and healthy, and so on. Health problem, disease detection, early warning detection of diseases, proactively helping people solve the non-communicable diabetics, etc., problems. So problems are plenty, but I think there's a great opportunity for us to do something good.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And those are some fantastic points you both made on the need to kind of break down silos and have more interdisciplinary collaborations at a more global level, and to also think of like the scaling issue when it comes to like cities and planning for cities. I'm sure our listeners would have found this super insightful and interesting to listen to both of you. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. We'll be back next month with more conversations at the intersection of climate change and artificial intelligence in Asia. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for our monthly newsletter at codegreen.asia. I'm Donna Matthew, and on behalf of Digital Futures Lab, thank you for listening.